Doki Doki Literature Club is a cute and wholesome visual novel. It is what the cover and description of the game would allude to. But, immediately upon loading the game, you're met with a warning. This game is not suitable for children or those who are easily disturbed. Individuals suffering from anxiety or depression may not have a positive experience playing this game. Right off the bat, this game is already giving us a red flag. If the game looks so cutesy and wholesome, then why am I being warned that the game has highly disturbing content? I'll explain all of that in a bit, but first let's get the basic plot and setting out of the way first. DDLC starts off like any normal dating sim or visual novel, with every character and scenario being tropes of other visual novels and anime in general. You have Sayuri, the childhood friend trope, Yuri, the shy and reclusive one, Natsuki, the typical tsundere, and finally, the class star Monika, who is seemingly perfect. It does start off pretty generic, but as you get further and further in the game, you start to notice nuances and small things that make each character unique. I could honestly make a whole video in of itself, talking about each character, just because of how much depth there is to each of them. But for now, I'll just go over the basics of what makes each character unique, so that this video isn't 3 hours long. I'll preface this next part with a spoiler warning, because I really do think if you haven't already, you should play this game. And if you do end up playing it, then it's best to play blind for the best experience. Though I'm sure a lot of you have already played the game, or watched a playthrough at least if you're watching this video. Thought I'd put it there just in case though. Anyway, starting off with Sayuri, she's a giant bundle of sunshine, and also the typical childhood friend trope. She starts off relatively normal, like you wouldn't think to look any deeper, because the game makes it seem like she's a giant bundle of sunshine with overflowing positivity, because that's just what that trope entails. Slowly but surely though, we catch glimpses of what makes her the way that she is, and after a few days at the club, she starts acting more and more downcast in comparison to her usual self. Later on, we visit Sayuri's house and we find out why. It turns out that she's been suffering from depression most of her life, and that most days she can't even find a reason to get out of bed. Which ties way back to the beginning of the game, where the MC mentions how Sayuri started to oversleep more and more frequently. The game doesn't just give her more depth, it also ties back previous dialogue to make you feel more connected. Like, on her first playthrough, there are a lot of subtle hints that you most likely wouldn't see. But looking back or playing through the game again, you begin to see that this game is full of foreshadowing and hints at each of the girl's individual problems and worries. Yuri, like Sayuri, would also at first glance seem to be the typical shy girl anime trope. But, if we've seen anything from this game thus far, it's that it loves to give its players the impression that they know what they're looking at. Like with Sayuri, Yuri has a secret as well. Although both Yuri and Natsuki are different in that their problems are only alluded to in the first act, in comparison to Sayuri, where the game just outright tells us. For Yuri and Natsuki, we learn pretty early on that they both have a hobby they feel like they'd be made fun of for. In Natsuki's case, we are able to guess pretty easily that manga is the hobby that she is talking about, even though she doesn't outright say it. With the Yuri, however, we aren't told exactly what it is. The game does eventually seem like it tells us what it is though. If you end up choosing to help Yuri with the festival preparations, she comes to the MC's house, and after a bit of talking, we learn that she's into collecting knives. Seems like the hobby she would be afraid of people making fun of her for, right? Well, not fully. The game only gives us a half-truth here. We learn in the second act that she doesn't just collect knives, she also cuts herself with them. We aren't given an exact reason why she does, but it's alluded to by Monika in the second act that she either does it because she gets some kind of high out of it, or that it might even be like a sexual thing. In Natsuki's case though, she, just like the other two girls, also has a problem she is suffering from. For her, it's that she has an abusive father, which is alluded to a couple times in the first act, but by the second act we are once again outright told. This also gives us a little more insight on why she acts more mean than she wants to sometimes. It doesn't fully make it okay, but we can at least sympathize with her situation. As for Monika, I'll go over her basics for now, and go into the more detailed stuff later. because she's not only extremely complex, but it would also be a massive spoiler. She's the generic perfect girl trope with seemingly no flaws, which is already a bit confusing considering every girl has had some sort of problem that they're dealing with. And yet here you have Monika, who doesn't have any. It's extremely suspicious, I know, but I'll get to the rest of it later. Throughout the game, we are given a few choices. Not too many, but that just makes them seem like they would have more importance. We're given small choices, like choosing which girl we agree with, who to write our poem for, who we walk home with, little things like that. Nothing too big. But the most damning one comes close to the end of the first act. On the day we learn of Sayori's depression, she later comes to visit the MC, and after a brief talk, we learn that Sayori has feelings for the MC, and that seeing us hang out with the other girls brings her pain. Then comes the big decision. We can either accept her confession, or friendzone her. Which, if you're on the Sayori route, then you'd obviously accept. But this is where the game starts to play tricks on you. If you were instead on either Yuri or Natsuki's route, many will be contemplating this decision very heavily, as you don't want to make Sayori sad, but you can't just outright lie to her either.
Alright. Jesus. So we're literally going at. She just saw us trying to kiss Natsuki. If we say I love you, it's pretty obvious we're just feeling bad for her, and she's gonna be like, no, you don't love me, you're trying to fuck Natsuki.
She'll accept it, I'm pretty sure.
You think so? Or in the playthrough,
it's up to you. It's up to you, buddy. Whatever one you want to go with.
So I'm assuming if we say I love you, this will change everything that's gonna happen tomorrow, and
maybe.
we're not. Yeah, I know it. So I feel like this. Like...
Meanwhile, on the Sayori route, you may be feeling safe, almost like you made the right choice. That's just the thing, though. There is no right choice. Literally. It doesn't matter which one you pick, because regardless of which one you choose, the next day, you will find her hanging. And it does this with all choices, by the way. It makes it seem like it has an impact, only for it to have minor changes to the story, or none at all. It's a linear game, with choices there to disguise it as anything but linear. This works wonders to confuse the fuck out of the players, though. Exactly what Dan Salvato is aiming for. This continues on in the second act, with the game giving you a lot of the same choices from Act 1, but made even more clear that they're just there to give the illusion of choice. Since this is a psychological horror game, this does a really good job at unnerving the player, even more than they already were. Speaking of its psychological horror aspect, I want to touch on it a bit more, and how it all works. Let's start off with its hints to its darker side. Throughout the game, we share poems with each of the club members as part of the club activities. It seems simple enough at first, what the basic meaning of each of the girls' poems are about, on a surface level anyway, but upon revisiting them, after getting a little more information on each character, we start to see that pretty much every poem they write alludes to some problem they face. In Sayori's case, we see hints at her depression in bottles, which is a reference to how she sacrifices her own happiness for others, and how worthless she feels. Even her love for the MC is hinted at in Dear Sunshine. The sunshine referring to the MC, and how he stops her from wanting to kill herself. The you here referring to the MC, and the sleep forever being a reference to her suicidal thoughts. For Yuri, it's near impossible to see the hints, unless you have prior knowledge, but they are there. You have relatively easy to understand ones, such as Ghost Under the Light, which is a pretty clear reference to how she feels like a loner. But then you have extremely confusing ones, like the raccoon, which alludes to how she cuts herself, which you would have no way of really figuring out in Act 1. Natsuki, unlike Yuri, has easier to understand hints about her abusive father. We aren't told it exactly in Act 1, but we are given a lot more information than with Yuri early on. We're told stuff like how strict he is, and how she has to make sure she saves her appetite, and eat as much of it as she can. Subtle stuff like that. As for her poems, most of them are relatively easy to understand, with the only one that gives us clues about her deep secret being her last poem she gives a player if they made their poem for Natsuki 3 days in a row. Titled Because You, it's about just that, the MC, and how him just spending time with her and being kind makes her life easier, alluding to the possibility that she doesn't have it very easy in the first place. It's pretty subtle, and also about a lot more than just her abuse, but I thought I'd include it anyway, just because it's my favorite of the girl's poems. Monika, on the other hand, is once again seemingly perfect at first glance. The most you would be able to figure out in the first act is that she has self-confidence issues, which is just a small cover-up for what her problem really is. I'm going to go into full detail about it in the last chapter of this video, because like I said, she's a lot more complex than the other three. So as to make sure I don't make her take up too much time in this section, I instead have made a section just for her at the end. Her role is the biggest here after all. Besides all of the game's hints to its darker side, there is also a lot of subtle foreshadowing. Like, a lot. But I'll list up just a few examples in no particular order. On the very first day you share poems with the club members, Sayuri actually foreshadows her death. After sharing poems with Sayuri, she says that writing is like magic, and that she's going to keep writing until she dies. Some of these aren't so subtle when looking back with more perspective, but to someone playing the game for the first time, she's just joking about it and it's nothing deeper than that. Then you have ones that are really obvious. On the day when Sayuri starts acting more depressed and leaves the classroom, Natsuki will question why the mood feels weird, and Yuri says stagnating air is common foreshadowing that something terrible is about to happen. Which ends up being true, because only a few days later is when Sayuri hangs herself. But, for my personal favorite, it's on the very first day at the club, when Yuri goes into detail about why she likes novels and fantasy worlds. She says, and I quote, "Isn't it amazing how a writer can so deliberately take advantage of your own lack of imagination to completely throw you through a loop?" I see this as Den Salvato himself making fun of the player for not having the ability to think outside the box and see the big twist of the game's true nature. That could just be my headcanon though. Back to the psychological horror aspect of the game. After hints and foreshadowing to its dark side, we also have the aspects that are creepy and unnerving regardless of context. For example, Monika's occasional fourth wall breaks. Every now and then, during the first act, Monika will just randomly say something that breaks the fourth wall. On the second day at the club, she literally tells us, "Don't forget to save your game." Of course, a fourth wall break is creepy by itself, but it makes it much more creepy because it's so out of nowhere with no context or exclamation, along with the contrast to the usual cute and upbeat tone of the game. The next fourth wall break is when the MC notices that the girl's poems are more sad than happy, to which Monika replies, "Humans aren't two-dimensional creatures," which the saying is supposed to be one-dimensional, but it's an obvious nod to her being a two-dimensional character, literally. Other than those fourth wall breaks though, we don't really see anything that scary until the day of the festival, the day where Sayuri hangs herself. The day starts off like any other, except for one small thing. The music isn't playing, and we're left with an uncomfortable feeling as we make our way to the club. At the club room, we talk to Monika, who not only somehow knows about the exchange with Sayuri, her confession, but also comments on how the MC didn't go to wake her up by saying, "You kinda left her hanging this morning, you know." A not-so-subtle hint to Sayuri hanging herself, if you know the context beforehand. Then we see one of Sayuri's poems in the club, one that we haven't read before. It's unsettling to say the least, but what makes it even creepier is knowing the context of the poem, and what it really means. Like sure, it's definitely creepy on its own, but when you realize the person she's telling to get out of her head is actually the MC, it brings a whole new meaning to it. Along with a subtle hint towards Monika's involvement, the she here referring to Monika. We know it's Monika she is referring to, because way back to right before Sayuri confesses to us, she mentions that Monika said something to her, presumably not something nice. With a tiny bit more digging, we could even find out exactly when she said it. On the day where Sayuri starts acting a little down, the MC will confide in Monika to see if she knows anything. And after a bit of talking, she says she'll talk with her. The MC tries to listen in, but Monika was keeping her voice very quiet. I'm almost positive this is when she talked to her, but it could just be a huge coincidence. Knowing this game though, I don't think that's the case. After seeing Sayori's unsettling poem, the MC decides to go check on her, and that is when we see Sayori hanging in her room. In that scene, we see a message that says see traceback.txt for details, a file in the game itself, a full fourth wall break. From this point on, the game no longer cares to hide these in plain sight. They are a lot more direct. Not only that, but right after Sayori's death, the game supposedly ends. But upon loading the game back up, it looks a bit different. The spot where we're supposed to see Sayori on the main menu is instead replaced with an amalgamation of Monika, Yuri, and Natsuki, almost like the game is trying to fix itself without the existence of Sayori's character file. Yeah, her character gets deleted from the game itself when she dies. Along with Sayori missing from the menu entirely, there is also a jumbled up text where the new game option is supposed to be. By clicking on it, it does exactly that, start a new game. Except this time, every mention of Sayori is replaced with a jumbled mess, and when we get to the point where Sayori is supposed to show up, we're once again met with the amalgamation of the three characters in a glitchy mess. From this point on, the game no longer tries to hide Sayori's name with jumbled up text, but will instead start the game over as if she were never in it. The game continues on as normal, with the exception of Monika taking Sayori's role in bringing us to the club, and a lot of glitches. A lot of these glitches reveal the girls' secret problems that they deal with that I talked about in part 1. The glitches themselves aren't the scariest things, but after not only being traumatized by Sayori's death, along with none of it being explained, it leaves the player with an extreme sense of unease and tension, with each small jump scare adding a little more. I won't go too in depth on the jump scare aspect, just because I still feel it's best to experience it for yourself. What I will say though is that the game is different for each person, with certain jump scares and scenarios only having a small chance of happening, meaning two people can play the game and get different jump scares.
Oh, what the? Wait a fucking second. Just look at the back. Look at the back. Look at the poster at the back.
Which one?
Look at the poster at the back of the room.
Oh, I don't see nothing. What's up?
You don't see anything in the back of the room?
What do you see?
I see Sayori hanging in the back of the room. Look,
Are you fucking kidding me? I don't see that shit. Dude, I got fucking chills.
It's fucking
I don't see that. I don't have that. I have the normal board.
With it being even more diverse if they chose different girls for their poems. This all adds to the game feeling like it has multiple routes you can go, but in the end, it's all linear. The outcome won't change no matter what you choose. I will put one last spoiler warning here, because I'm about to be talking about the biggest spoiler in the game. At this point in the video, I feel like you could still play the game and fully enjoy your experience. But in this next section, I will be breaking down all mystery concerning both Monika and the game itself. There is no turning back, and no experiencing the game for the first time yourself, ever, if you watch this next part and haven't played the game already. Final warning. Now finally onto the topic that I've been teasing for pretty much the whole video. It's time we talk about Monika. Just Monika. This whole section is just for that. Like I've said before, each of the girls have their own individual problems. This of course includes Monika. Monika's problem is that she's trapped. In the game. That's right. She's sentient. She's aware. There is like a whole ARG that goes in depth into the game's lore that explains why she is sentient, but it's not really information you need in order to enjoy the game. Back to her sentience though. She actually gives us many hints to it in both the first and second act, mostly through her poems, but also through a few lines of dialogue as well. With her first poem, Hole in Wall, being a direct comparison to her realization that she is in a video game. The he at the end of the poem, referring to us, not the MC, but us in real life. When the MC asked Monika what her inspiration behind the poem was, she said she had some kind of epiphany recently, with the epiphany of course being her realization. Every single one of her poems are like this, by the way, And it's genius, because if you look at it at a surface level, without the context of her sentience, you'd probably never guess what they're about. In the second act of the game, Yuri becomes more and more obsessive. It gets to a dangerous point, and she eventually confesses to the player. It would once again seem like we've been given an important choice to make here, but if we know anything by this point, it's that these choices don't matter. So of course, neither does this one. No matter which one you choose, Yuri will end up laughing hysterically and stab herself to death in front of the MC. After this, the game script breaks and we're forced to spend the weekend with a slowly decomposing Yuri. Once the weekend ends, Natsuki comes in first and sees Yuri's body and quickly runs out of the club room. Next, Monika enters the club room, and after seeing Yuri's body, decides that the facade is over, and outright says, "I didn't realize the script was broken that badly." She would then delete both Natsuki and Yuri from the game. She then makes it so that the club room is just for the two of you, with everything else being a broken mess. Literally empty space outside the club room. It's here that she tells us of her sentience, and how she amplified the girl's worst traits in order to prevent them from confessing to us. It also makes sense at this point why no matter what you do for Sayuri, she will always end up hanging herself. Because Monika had amplified her depression. Monika tells us how she can't see the girls as real, because they don't have sentience, but how we're real, us, the player. She talks about how it feels to be the only one with free will, and how trapped she is. Imagine, for a moment, that you woke up the next day, and realized you were in a simulation. Realized that not a single other person in the world was aware of it other than you. That every little thing you've done and experienced in life wasn't real. It's a scary thought that I feel most people would be able to sympathize with. I often see the argument that Monika is a psychopath because she deleted the girls without remorse, which doesn't make sense for a number of reasons, but I'll go into the two biggest ones. For one, the girls aren't real, they're visual novel characters. To say she's a psychopath for deleting them is the same as saying every single person who's killed a video game character or an NPC without remorse is also a psychopath. But besides that, even with the knowledge that they weren't real, she does have remorse for deleting them. After Monika tells us of her sentience, she gives us a pretty detailed guide on how she deleted the girls, which is the game's way of hinting to the player to delete Monika. Once you do delete her, she is initially very angry with us, but does eventually show that she has remorse for deleting the girls, and understands why we did it. She reveals to us that she didn't actually delete the girls, and that was kind of an exaggeration. She then decides that the game would be better off without her in it, and restarts the game without her. At the main menu, Sayuri has returned, but Monika is nowhere to be found. When we start a new game, we get to see just how different all the characters act without Monika's influence. With Sayuri now waking up on time and being club president, and Natsuki and Yuri getting along. But of course, with a game like this, that would be too happy of an ending. And after spending a little time at the club, Sayuri reveals to us that she actually knew we were going to join the club, and thanks us for getting rid of Monika. That's right, presumably because she's president now. She's the one that has sentience. But before Sayuri can pull a Monika and delete everything, Monika herself intervenes and deletes Sayuri, and the game itself, deciding that there's no happiness to be found here, and the game ends. After the credits roll, we're given one last final goodbye from Monika, and the game is officially broken at this point, not allowing you to play it again until you reset it in the files, starting the whole journey over again. And that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about the game. There are about a million other things I could praise the game for and talk about, but I didn't want this video to be too long. Personally, for me, this is one of my favorite stories of all time. A perfect tragedy. I don't really replay it much, but I often find myself going to YouTube and watching different playthroughs of the game. And each time I do, I find myself finding out something new about the game. That's what inspired me to make this video. Just watching countless videos on the game and finding myself more and more intrigued. If you've reached this point in the video, I'm assuming you've already played the game, or at least watched a playthrough yourself. If you're still intrigued in the story of the game, I'd recommend you to watch all 4 of Game Theory's videos on the game. They give a whole new perspective of the game and its characters. But anyways, just thank you guys so much for even watching this far in the first place. This is the first ever commentary video I've done, so hopefully it isn't that bad. With that being said though, it means the world to me that even a small portion of people out there care about my weird ramblings. If this video gets even a small amount of attention, you can bet that I'll be making more videos like this, probably on other games that I'm really passionate about. Oh, and I guess I'm supposed to ask you guys to subscribe. Kinda forgot about that until this point in the video. Don't forget to subscribe, I guess. See you guys later, and remember, just Monika. Just Monika. Just Monika. Just...